I want to talk to you guys about Bakhmut. First, we're going to look at some new footage that just came out of Bakhmut, specifically from Ukraine's border guards who are fighting in the city. For those of you who don't know, it's not just the traditional Ukrainian armed forces that are fighting, but also the territorial defense, a lot of local police forces which have been militarized, and also border guards, which might feel strange to you as an American or as somebody in another country, but you got to remember that every aspect of Ukrainian society is fighting against the invasion. So we're going to look at some of this footage just because it's interesting, and then we're going to talk about some updates from Bakhmut and how it's become a meat grinder for the Russians. And even as they continue to take land, Ukraine uses new tactics in order to further intensify the losses that the Russians are suffering. That used to be a city of 70,000 people. 70,000 people. Those aren't even recognizable anymore. You have no clue what those buildings used to even be for.
Розмовляють, що вони кричать там вперед, назад.
Приймаю на 5, 7. Ери, де ти є? Де ти є? Куди йти прикривати? Кого витягувати? Кажіть, куди йти?
Ось тут.
Ось там, кажіть, поближе.
Да, вони оточили їх хату.
Вони вже в хати зайшли чи що?
Да, зайшли з сусіднього дома.
Дед, накриваємо, виходь, пошли. Дед, давай, виходь. Русик, дивись право. Пацани, хтось один, забивайте магазини. Забивай. Все, хлопці вийшли, давай, следующий. Перебігай, давай. Давай, я прикриваю, давай, пошли, бігом, пацани.
Постріл! Постріл! Тихо!
30-39.
You get the idea. So, as the meat grinder in Bakhmut continues, as it continues to go on for 10 months now, it's been going on for 10 months, the battle for Bakhmut. It's been going on for over 250 days, I think going on 260 days soon. As this continues to grind on, finally, after all this time, they start to take a little bit more territory. They're starting to make a little bit more ground, the Russians are in Bakhmut. And here is the current map in Bakhmut. And let's go over how it has changed in the last few days. Let's go into the history. And you can see that they're making some progress through April. So if we go to April 1st, they're here. And through the month of April, they've been able to make a decent amount of progress, getting deeper and deeper into the city, taking the majority of the city now. Now they have a good 60 to 70% of the city, as the Ukrainians are only holding on to the most west part of the city now and some strategically important locations that allows them to just barely hold on to some parts of the city now. I would say about like 20 to 30%. But every single inch that the Russians are taking, they're paying for heavily in blood. According to Igor Girkin, who recently posted a mega rant about the battle for Bakhmut and the battle for Avdiivka, he's saying that the Wagner forces that are being thrown into the fray are no longer able to sustain the offensive on their own and now need to be supplemented through mobilized Russians. So we're having mobilized people with very low levels of training being thrown into the back of these troop carriers with the Russian prisoners recruited into Wagner, as well as some of the regular armed forces. Let's read a little bit about this. This is Igor Girkin. He's the former defense minister for the Donetsk People's Republic, Russia's proxy state in Ukraine. He's also been, I believe he's under investigation or been indicted for war crimes, including the shooting down of a civilian airliner over the last 8 years of fighting in the Donbass. He's also a former FSB agent, and he is a virulent anti-Semite. Anyway, let's read. But okay, so that was not the best endorsement of the man, but the reason I read his stuff is because it gives you a perspective into the pro-war, pro-Russian perspective that he, touts because he believes in it, and he is not as filtered as a lot of the other Russian media out there is. The situation at the front. There are still two main hotspots. In Bakhmut, fierce street fighting continues. The enemy is being pushed out of the western part of the city very slowly. Wagner is actively reinforced with army units and mobniks. Stormtroopers can no longer cope without them. The losses incurred are being felt. That means they're taking heavy losses. Near Avdiivka, things are much worse as a result of the meat assaults in recent days. By the way, meat assaults? Meat assaults. Doesn't sound like you're, if you're calling your attacks meat assaults, that doesn't sound like you're, a vital part of the team. Makes you sound a little dispensable. The composition of several assault companies has been knocked out without the slightest result. Not the worst companies, by the way. The problems are the same as for the entire past year. Attacks are carried out without sufficient artillery preparation, and what they do have is very inaccurate and very few shells. With almost no armored vehicles, and sometimes without them at all, aviation operates approximately as actively and successfully as in the Battle of Borodino in 1812, before planes were invented. My forecast remains the same. It will not be possible to encircle Avdiivka. A breakthrough near the Devastation is necessary to encircle the city from the south before the counteroffensive of the armed forces of Ukraine. And yes, I'm probably discrediting, but for these meat assaults that have been going on for a year now with the same method, I would have shot the entire command from the army and down to the regiment level. Now, when he says I'm probably discrediting, there is a law in Russia about, quote unquote, discrediting the armed forces. That means you can get prison time for discrediting them. That means you say something like, oh, the Russian army sucks. Or you say something that could be true about the Russian army, but makes them look bad, right? These are things, for example, if you were to say Bucha was committed by the Russian army, which it was, that can get you prison time in Russia. So if you were to tell the truth about Bucha, that's something that can get you prison time. And so he's referencing that discreditation, but he's using it to try to make a pro-nationalist, like we need to change our strategies. These tactics aren't working. For this cannot be cured in any other way after him saying that all these people need to be shot. And the fact that this disgrace has been going on for more than a year does not even allow to reduce the punishment to penal battalion level. Just in case, the number of irretrievable losses for some units with precision up to one individual are known to me. I do not cite them only for reasons of military secrecy. I sent it to those who should have it, although this, according to experience, is completely useless. So, this talks a lot about Avdiivka. For those of you who don't know where that is, this is down south here. This is something that location that's been held for a very long time by the Ukrainians. When the February 24th invasion happened in 2022, Avdiivka was on the border with the occupied territory, and over a year later, it's still on the border of the occupied territory, and it's been getting pounded ever since the start of the February 24th invasion in 2022. This is a location that's been built up over the last 8 years because it has a close proximity to the conflict in the Donbass. And so due to the fact that it's been built up and due to the strength and determination of its defenders, Avdiivka, for the entirety of this invasion, has held strong. Now, Shoigu and his own new private military company that many people say he's made specifically to compete with Wagner. Shoigu is the Russian defense minister, close ally of Vladimir Putin. He is confident that they can take Avdiivka, and he's trying very, very hard to take Avdiivka. He's sending in his private mercenaries. He's sending in the Russian military. He's trying to shell it. But they've basically reduced themselves to human wave tactics, and they have failed to take it, but have taken immensely heavy losses, which Igor Girkin is referring to here. As for Bakhmut, when he's talking about these heavy losses, as the Russian army, as we can see here from the last few days that have been going on, they are making progress. That progress is drenched in blood. And I want to show you one example of how it's been drenched in blood. This is from War Translated. War Translated does a lot of translations from Russian Telegram, both, in text form and in audio form. And they're talking about a method that the Ukrainians are using for when they have to give up territory to the Russians in Bakhmut that is leading to a lot of dead Russians. Several Russian sources talk about the Ukrainian tactic in Bakhmut, where advancing Russian chamovniks and convicts are lured into abandoned buildings, which are then blown up. Let's read the post. I did not want to write about this, so not to spread the harmful experience remotely, but colleagues are already writing. During the retreat, Ukrainian soldiers destroyed residential buildings that they have turned into fortresses, trying to bury our soldiers underneath the ruins. By the way, mining territory behind you is an old experience. I remember how in January of 1995 in Grozny, the militants abandoned one of the buildings without a fight. The GRU Special Police Group settled in it, equipped a temporary deployment point, and the house was mined. It was remotely blown up, and all the Spetsnaz died. Later, Chechen fighters left other surprises: concrete pillars with bombs inside, and corpses of dogs on the street with landmines sewn into their belly. A few days ago, in Bakhmut, the commanders of one of the Wagner assault squads said the Ukrainian military lures our stormtroopers into their fortifications, as if abandoning them, then blow them up. This is a disgusting practice. On one hand, the Wagnerites should not take risks and bring many people into liberated buildings, but the armed forces of Ukraine will immediately counterattack with large forces. Now, I just have to say, the amount of sympathy I have for Wagner guys being lured into these traps before being blown up when the Ukrainians finally decide that they have to give up some territory, that there's too much pressure being placed upon them. It's weird because Wagner has engaged in using anti-personnel mines throughout this war. The Russian military generally has been engaged in the use of anti-personnel mines, and they very openly engage in that practice. So now seeing that a complaint about mines being laid on the Ukrainian side for them to then walk into is quite baffling. Now, I understand that in 1997, Ukraine signed a treaty against the use of anti-personnel mines, and maybe Russia and Russian soldiers can complain about the use of anti-personnel mines on the Ukrainian side and holding them to their own standards if they themselves had also signed said treaty, which they didn't, and if they themselves were not actively engaged in the use of these anti-personnel mines. Hell, much of the anti-personnel mines that have been reportedly used on the Ukrainian side and the anti-tank, anti-armor mines that have been used, which are not, restricted by the same laws, restricted by the same international precedent, is from captured Russian ammunition depots, where the Ukrainians capture it from the Russians, where they were intending to use it against the Ukrainians. Anyway, let's read the last part of this. This is a disgusting practice. On the one hand, the Wagnerites should not take risks and bring many people into liberated buildings, but the armed forces of Ukraine will immediately counterattack with larger forces. If they bring in many fighters, there's a danger of losing them during an explosion. The enemy in Artemovsk is fighting boldly and creatively with great forces and still retreats. Now, for any of you curious of seeing footage of this practice, it actually does exist online. There is a few videos of it, but this is the most clear video of it. It doesn't show you the exact moment of the explosion, but you get the point. This is a video where of a building that the Ukrainians had to abandon during the defense of Bakhmut, that they then planted bombs in, planted explosives in, and then when enough Russians had flooded into the building and had secured it, they then triggered the mines and killed all of the Russians inside, as you can see here, causing a massive explosion that covered many of those inside, trapped them under the rubble, and assumedly suffocated many of them. This is something that the Ukrainians have done on more than one occasion in the city, and we can probably expect them to do it again in the future. This serves two purposes. The first purpose is, of course, it kills Russian soldiers. Even when they give up territory, this means they can still take down a few with them. And so this means this meat grinder of a city adds another a level of grinding to it. This serves the second purpose as well, which is, and this is talked about in that telegram, it causes the Russians to hesitate, where, oh snap, the Ukrainians are pulling back. Well, I want to take this building, but is it filled with explosives? Well, maybe we should send in sappers first to check the building. Well, maybe we should just send in a few people and not send in a lot of people, because if we send in a lot of people, then possibly we could lose a lot of guys if they trigger an explosive. And this allows the Ukrainians to, counterattack and possibly hold the building longer. It causes hesitation in the Russian lines. And so this has a deeper psychological effect and strategic effect if this practice is begun to be expected by the Russian forces. Very brutal tactics being used in Bakhmut right now. The city is a complete meat grinder.